The morning mist clung to the jagged peaks of Cerro Gordo like the breath of sleeping giants. But Captain Robert Edward Lee knew better than to trust such peaceful appearances. From his position on the rocky outcrop, he studied the Mexican fortifications through his field glasses, noting how General Antonio López de Santa Anna had transformed the mountain pass into what appeared to be an impregnable fortress. The date was April 17, 1847, and the fate of the Mexican-American War hung in the balance like a sword. Suspended by the thinnest of threads, Lee lowered his glasses and wiped the condensation from the lenses with methodical precision. Behind him, 8,500 American soldiers waited in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces etched with the kind of tension that comes before a battle that will either make legends or graves. Major General Winfield Scott, commanding the expedition, had made his intentions clear. The road to Mexico City ran through this treacherous pass, and no amount of Mexican resistance would turn them back. The young engineer officer had spent the better part of 3 days conducting reconnaissance missions through the seemingly impenetrable terrain surrounding the Mexican positions. What he had discovered would change everything. While Santa Anna's 12,000 troops held the obvious approaches with artillery batteries and entrenched infantry, there was another way, a path so difficult and dangerous that the Mexican general had deemed it impossible for an army to traverse. It was precisely the kind of audacious maneuver that would define Scott's campaign and forge the reputation of officers who would later become household names in American military history. As referenced in historical accounts from the Britannica Encyclopedia, Scott's 8,500 men reached Plan del Rio, a small settlement about 60 miles northwest of Veracruz, where they encountered the first serious resistance in the Mexican War. The mountain pass of Cerro Gordo represented more than a strategic obstacle. It was a test of American resolve and military ingenuity that would echo through the decades to come. Lieutenant Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard emerged from the shadows, his boots crunching softly on the loose shale. The young artillery officer's eyes held the same mixture of excitement and apprehension that Lee had seen in his own reflection that morning. "Captain Lee," Beauregard whispered, his Louisiana accent barely audible above the distant sound of Mexican sentries calling out their positions. "General Scott requests your presence at headquarters. He says the reconnaissance reports are ready for final review." Lee nodded, taking one last look at the formidable Mexican positions. The main road wound through the pass like a serpent, controlled by artillery pieces that could turn any conventional assault into a massacre. Santa Anna had chosen his ground well, positioning his forces on the heights where they could rain down destruction on any force foolish enough to attempt a frontal attack. The Mexican general, who had already proven his tactical acumen in previous engagements, understood that this natural choke point could break the American advance and potentially change the course of the war. The American camp below stirred with the quiet activity of soldiers preparing for battle. Men checked their weapons, wrote letters home they hoped would never be delivered, and shared what might be their last conversations with comrades who had become brothers through shared hardship and danger. Among them moved officers who would later command armies in the great conflict that would tear the nation apart. Ulysses Simpson Grant, George Brinton McClellan, and Thomas Jonathan Jackson, all learning the lessons of war that would shape their futures in ways they could never imagine. As Lee made his way down the rocky slope toward Scott's headquarters, he reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought him to this moment. The son of Revolutionary War hero Henry Lee, he had graduated second in his class from West Point and had spent his career building fortifications and improving harbors. Now he found himself at the center of a campaign that would determine whether the United States would expand its territory to the Pacific Ocean or be halted by Mexican resistance in the mountains of central Mexico. The plan that had taken shape in Scott's mind was audacious beyond measure. While the Mexican forces concentrated their attention on the main road, the Americans would attempt to outflank the entire position by moving through terrain so difficult that it seemed impossible for a military force to navigate. It was the kind of maneuver that military historians would study for generations, a perfect example of how superior intelligence and tactical innovation could overcome numerical disadvantage and seemingly insurmountable obstacles. General Winfield. Scott stood over the crude map spread across his field desk, his imposing figure casting long shadows in the flickering candlelight. At 6 feet 5 inches tall, Scott commanded respect through presence alone, but it was his strategic mind that had earned him the nickname Old Fuss and Feathers. The map before him showed the Mexican positions at Cerro Gordo, marked with red ink that seemed to pulse like fresh blood in the uncertain light. "Gentlemen," Scott began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had fought in 3 wars. "Captain Lee's reconnaissance has revealed what may be our salvation or our doom." He traced a finger along the contour lines that marked the treacherous terrain to the left of the Mexican positions. While General Santa Anna has fortified the obvious routes, he has left his left flank exposed. Believing the ground to be impassable for a military force, Lee stepped forward, unrolling a more detailed sketch of the terrain he had personally surveyed. "General, I've identified a path that skirts the Mexican positions entirely. It's treacherous, steep, rocky, and barely wide enough for men to move in single file in some places, but it's passable, and it leads directly to the rear of Santa Anna's main position." The assembled officers leaned closer, studying the hand-drawn map with the intensity of men whose lives depended on its accuracy. Major General David Emmanuel Twiggs, commanding the advanced division, stroked his graying beard thoughtfully. "Captain, are you certain this route can accommodate artillery? We'll need guns to support any assault." "With some engineering work, yes, sir," Lee replied confidently. "We'll need to widen certain sections and build temporary bridges, but it can be done. The Mexicans will never expect us to emerge from that direction." As dawn broke over the Mexican camp, General Santa Anna reviewed his own dispositions with satisfaction. The former president of Mexico had positioned his forces with the skill of a chess master, placing artillery batteries at key points where they could sweep the main approaches. With devastating fire, his 12,000 men occupied positions that nature itself seemed to have designed for defense. With the bulk of his strength concentrated where he expected the Americans to attack, Santa Anna's confidence was not misplaced. The Mexican forces had fought with distinction in previous engagements, and their defensive positions at Cerro Gordo appeared virtually impregnable. The general had learned from his defeat at Buena Vista, where American forces under Zachary Taylor had withstood his assault through superior tactics and determination. This time, he would force the Americans to come to him, to attack positions of his choosing, where Mexican advantages in numbers and terrain would tell. But Santa Anna had underestimated both the audacity of American leadership and the skill of officers like Robert Lee, whose engineering expertise would prove decisive in the coming battle. The Mexican general's focus on the obvious approaches had created a blind spot that Scott intended to exploit with devastating effect. Back in the American camp, the complex preparations for Scott's flanking maneuver began in earnest. Lee led teams of engineers and pioneers who worked under cover of darkness to improve the mountain path, moving rocks, building makeshift bridges, and creating routes that could accommodate not just infantry, but also the artillery pieces that would be essential for success. The work was backbreaking and dangerous, conducted in near-complete silence to avoid detection by Mexican sentries. Captain George Brinton McClellan, serving as a staff officer, coordinated the movement of supplies and ammunition along the treacherous route. The young West Point graduate demonstrated the organizational skills that would later make him one of the Union's most effective administrators, though his caution would prove problematic in different circumstances. For now, his attention to detail was exactly what the operation required. The night of April 17th passed with agonizing slowness, as American forces prepared for the most audacious maneuver of the Mexican-American War. Men checked their equipment repeatedly, knowing that a single mistake could send them tumbling down the mountain slopes or alert the Mexican forces to their presence. The success of the entire campaign depended on maintaining the element of surprise. Until the moment of attack, Lieutenant Ulysses Grant, serving with the 4th Infantry Regiment, spent the hours before dawn writing in his journal, recording observations that would later influence his approach to warfare. The future commanding general of Union forces was learning lessons about logistics, surprise, and the importance of seizing initiative that would serve him well in the conflict that would define his generation. As the first light of April 18th began to illuminate the peaks of Cerro Gordo, both armies prepared for a battle that would demonstrate the evolution of American military thinking and the emergence of a new generation of officers who would shape the nation's destiny. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be remembered as one of the most brilliant tactical achievements in American military history. The pre-dawn darkness of April 18th, 1847, held a quality of expectation that every veteran soldier recognized the electric tension that precedes a battle that will be remembered long after the smoke clears. Captain Robert Lee moved through the American positions like a ghost, making final adjustments to the plan that had consumed his thoughts for days. The flanking route he had discovered wound through terrain so forbidding that Mexican sentries had dismissed it as impassable. But Lee's engineers had spent the night transforming the impossible into the inevitable. General Twiggs's division began their movement at 4 in the morning, advancing along Lee's carefully prepared path with the stealth of mountain cats. Each soldier understood that a single misplaced step, a dislodged stone, or a careless word could alert the Mexican forces and turn their audacious maneuver into a death trap. The men moved in single file through sections where the path narrowed to mere feet, their equipment carefully secured to prevent any metallic sound that might carry across the mountain air. Meanwhile, on the main road, General Gideon Johnson Pillow's division prepared for what appeared to be a conventional frontal assault. This was the deception that would sell the entire operation. While Mexican attention remained fixed on the obvious threat, the real blow would come from an unexpected direction. Pillow's men moved with deliberate visibility, their preparations designed to convince Santa Anna that American strategy remained predictably direct. The Mexican positions buzzed with activity as sentries reported the American movement. On the main road, General Santa Anna climbed to his observation post, studying the American dispositions through his field glasses with the satisfaction of a commander who had anticipated his enemy's every move. The Mexican artillery batteries, positioned to sweep the approaches with devastating crossfire, prepared to deliver the kind of punishment that would break American morale and potentially end Scott's campaign. But Santa Anna's confidence was about to be shattered by the emergence of American forces from terrain he had deemed impossible to traverse. At precisely 6:30 in the morning, as the first rays of sunlight struck the mountain peaks, Twiggs's division completed their flanking movement and found themselves behind the main Mexican positions. The element of surprise was complete, and the tactical advantage had shifted dramatically in favor of the Americans. The battle erupted with the sudden violence of a thunderstorm. American artillery, laboriously hauled along Lee's mountain path, opened fire on the Mexican positions from their rear, creating confusion and panic among defenders who had prepared for an entirely different battle. The sound of cannon fire echoing off the mountain walls created a terrifying cacophony that shattered the morning stillness and announced the beginning of one of the most decisive engagements of the Mexican-American War. Captain Lee, positioned where he could observe the entire battlefield, watched as his reconnaissance and engineering work translated into tactical success. The Mexican forces, caught between Pillow's frontal demonstration and Twiggs's flanking attack, found themselves fighting on two fronts simultaneously. Their carefully prepared defensive positions, so formidable when facing a single direction, became death traps when attacked from multiple angles. Lieutenant Thomas Jackson, serving with the 1st Artillery Regiment, distinguished himself by maintaining his batteries fire even as Mexican forces attempted to overrun his position. The future Confederate general's coolness under fire earned him recognition from his superiors and established the reputation for steadiness that would later earn him the nickname Stonewall. His actions at Cerro Gordo demonstrated the kind of leadership that would prove crucial in the greater conflict to come. The Mexican resistance was fierce but ultimately futile. Santa Anna's forces, despite their numerical superiority, could not adapt quickly enough to the changed tactical situation. The general himself barely escaped capture. as American forces pressed their advantage, consolidating their gains and preparing for the next phase of the assault. The psychological impact of the surprise attack was as important as the tactical advantage, demonstrating American military competence and undermining Mexican confidence. As the morning progressed, the full scope of Scott's strategic vision became apparent. The victory at Cerro Gordo would not only clear the path to Mexico City, but would also establish the reputation of American military leadership on the international stage. The officers who had planned and executed this brilliant maneuver would carry the lessons learned into future conflicts, where their experience in Mexico would prove invaluable. The battle was far from over, but the decisive moment had passed. American forces had achieved what military theorists would later recognize as a perfect example of tactical innovation overcoming numerical disadvantage. The steep climb that had seemed impossible had become the pathway to victory, and the generation of soldiers who had made that climb would be forever changed by the experience. The Mexican artillery batteries that had dominated the pass for days fell silent one by one, as American forces swept through positions that Santa Anna had considered impregnable. Captain Lee watched from his vantage point as the tactical situation evolved with the inexorable logic of superior planning meeting inferior positioning. The flanking movement had succeeded beyond even Scott's most optimistic projections, turning the Mexican defensive advantage into a strategic disaster. General Santa Anna, realizing that his carefully prepared positions were compromised, attempted to organize a counterattack that might salvage the situation. Mexican forces, despite their shock at the American appearance in their rear, demonstrated the courage and discipline that had made them formidable opponents throughout the war. Under the personal leadership of their commanding general, they launched a desperate assault designed to break the American flanking force and restore their defensive lines. The counterattack came with the fury of men fighting for their national honor and their lives. Mexican infantry, supported by cavalry that had been held in reserve, charged up the slopes toward American positions with a determination that impressed even their enemies. The sound of battle intensified as rifle fire echoed off the mountain walls, punctuated by the deeper roar of artillery and the shouts of officers trying to maintain control. In the chaos of combat, Lieutenant Grant, positioned with his regiment near the center of the American line, experienced combat with an intensity that would inform his later understanding of warfare. The future commanding general of Union forces watched as Mexican soldiers advanced with a bravery that transcended national boundaries, recognizing in his opponents the same qualities that he hoped to inspire in his own men. The lessons of Cerro Gordo would influence his approach to leadership throughout his career, but Mexican courage could not overcome American tactical advantage. The flanking movement had not only achieved surprise, but had also placed Scott's forces in positions where they could coordinate their fire with devastating effect. Artillery pieces that had been hauled up the mountain path through Lee's ingenuity now dominated the battlefield, their shells falling among Mexican forces with accuracy that reflected both superior positioning and excellent training. Captain McClellan, coordinating the movement of supplies and ammunition, demonstrated the organizational skills that would later make him one of the Union's most effective administrators. His attention to logistical details ensured that American forces maintained their momentum, with fresh ammunition and medical supplies reaching the front lines despite the difficult terrain. The young officer's work exemplified the kind of staff competence that would prove essential in future conflicts. The tide of battle turned decisively as American forces consolidated their gains and prepared for the final assault. General Twiggs, his division having achieved its initial objectives, reorganized his men for an advance that would clear the remaining Mexican positions. The general's tactical acumen, developed through years of frontier warfare, proved perfectly suited to the challenges of mountain fighting. Mexican resistance began to crumble as the reality of their tactical situation became undeniable. Soldiers who had fought with distinction throughout the morning found themselves caught between converging American forces with no avenue of escape. The defensive positions that had seemed so formidable at dawn had become traps that threatened to engulf the entire Mexican force. Santa Anna, recognizing that continued resistance would only increase his losses, began organizing a withdrawal that might preserve the core of his army for future operations. The Mexican general's decision to retreat rather than fight to the last man demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had made him a formidable opponent even in defeat. His ability to preserve his forces would allow Mexico to continue resistance. Throughout the war, the American victory at Cerro Gordo was complete, but not without cost. The mountain slopes were littered with the casualties of both armies, testimony to the fierce fighting that had characterized the engagement. Medical personnel, working under dangerous conditions, tended to wounded soldiers regardless of their nationality, demonstrating the humanity that persisted even in the midst of warfare. As the sun reached its zenith over the battlefield, the strategic implications of the American victory became clear. The road to Mexico City lay open, and Scott's campaign had achieved its first major objective. The battle had also established the reputations of numerous officers who would later command armies in the Civil War, their experience in Mexico providing the foundation for their future leadership. The fierce climb up the slopes of Cerro Gordo had indeed defined a generation of soldiers. The tactical lessons learned, the leadership skills developed, and the bonds forged in combat would all prove crucial in the great conflict that would soon divide the nation. The mountain pass that had seemed impossible to traverse had become the pathway to military immortality for the men who had made that climb. As the gunfire gradually subsided, and the smoke began to clear from the mountain passes, the full scope of the American victory at Cerro Gordo became apparent to both armies. Captain Lee, his uniform torn and stained from the morning's exertions, surveyed the battlefield with the methodical eye of an engineer assessing a completed project. The flanking route that had seemed so theoretical on paper had proven devastatingly effective in practice, demonstrating the power of superior intelligence and tactical innovation. The Mexican withdrawal had turned into a rout as Santa Anna's forces abandoned their positions and retreated toward the interior of Mexico. Equipment, artillery pieces, and supplies lay scattered across the mountainside, testament to the speed and completeness of the American victory. General Scott, arriving at the captured positions, could hardly believe the extent of his success. His gamble had paid off beyond his wildest expectations, opening the road to Mexico City and establishing American military reputation on the international stage. The human cost of the battle became apparent as medical personnel from both armies worked to treat the wounded. American casualties were relatively light, thanks to the tactical advantage gained through Lee's reconnaissance and the element of surprise. Mexican losses were severe, not only in killed and wounded, but also in prisoners captured and equipment lost. The psychological impact of the defeat would resonate throughout the Mexican military and government. Lieutenant Jackson, his artillery battery having distinguished itself throughout the engagement, began the process of accounting for his men and equipment. The future Confederate general's baptism of fire at Cerro Gordo had revealed the steady nerve and tactical acumen that would later make him one of the most feared commanders in American military history. His performance under pressure had impressed his superiors and established his reputation as an officer to watch. The strategic implications of the victory extended far beyond the immediate tactical success. With the Mexican army in retreat and the road to the capital open, Scott's campaign had achieved its first major objective. The general's reputation as a military commander was secure, and his innovative tactics would be studied in military academies for generations to come. The battle had also established the United States as a serious military power, capable of conducting complex operations far from its borders. Captain McClellan, his organizational skills having proven crucial to the operation's success, began the massive task of cataloging captured equipment and supplies. The young officer's attention to detail and administrative competence would serve him well in future assignments, though his caution would later prove problematic in different circumstances. For now, his work was essential to consolidating the gains achieved through combat. The Mexican prisoners, treated with the courtesy that characterized American military conduct throughout the war, provided valuable intelligence about enemy dispositions and intentions. Many expressed surprise at the American ability to traverse terrain they had considered impassable. Acknowledging the skill of Lee's reconnaissance and the audacity of Scott's planning, their accounts would later contribute to the historical understanding of the battle. General Santa Anna, having escaped capture by minutes, began the process of rebuilding his shattered forces. The Mexican general's resilience in the face of defeat demonstrated the qualities that had made him a formidable opponent throughout his career. His ability to maintain morale and reorganize his army would ensure that the war continued, though the strategic initiative had clearly passed to the Americans. As evening approached, American forces began the process of consolidating their positions and preparing for the next phase of the campaign. The mountain pass that had seemed so formidable at dawn now lay firmly under American control, with artillery positioned to dominate the surrounding terrain. The tactical transformation was complete, and the psychological impact on both armies was profound. The officers who had planned and executed the victory at Cerro Gordo would carry the lessons learned into future conflicts. The importance of reconnaissance, the value of surprise, and the power of innovative tactics would all influence their approach to warfare. In the years to come, the mountain pass had become a classroom where a generation of military leaders learned the arts of war. The Battle of Cerro Gordo had demonstrated that American military competence extended far beyond the frontier conflicts that had characterized earlier wars. The complex coordination required to execute Scott's flanking maneuver, the engineering skills needed to make the mountain path passable, and the tactical acumen displayed by officers at all levels had established the United States as a military power capable of projecting force across continents. The steep climb that had seemed impossible had become the pathway to a new understanding of American military potential. The morning of April 19th dawned clear and bright over the battlefield of Cerro Gordo, revealing the dramatic transformation that 24 hours of combat had wrought. Where Mexican artillery had once commanded the mountain passes, American flags now flew over captured positions, their colors brilliant against the stark mountain landscape. Captain Lee, conducting his final survey of the battlefield, could scarcely believe the completeness of the victory his reconnaissance had made possible. General Scott's staff worked with methodical efficiency to catalog the fruits of their success. The captured artillery numbered in the dozens, including pieces that would significantly strengthen American firepower for the remainder of the campaign. More importantly, the victory had opened the road to Mexico City, transforming Scott's expedition from a coastal invasion into a genuine threat to the Mexican capital and government. The psychological impact of the defeat resonated throughout the Mexican military and political establishment. News of Santa Anna's rout at Cerro Gordo spread quickly, undermining confidence in the government's ability to resist American advances. The battle had demonstrated that Mexican defensive advantages could be overcome through superior tactics and leadership, calling into question the entire strategy of resistance. Lieutenant Grant, writing to his fiancée Julia Dent, struggled to convey the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The future president attempted to describe the tactical brilliance of the flanking movement and the courage displayed by soldiers on both sides, but words seemed inadequate to capture the reality of combat. His letters home provided a personal perspective on events that would reshape the North American continent. The officers who had participated in the victory found themselves forever changed by the experience. Captain McClellan's organizational skills had proven crucial to the operation's success, establishing his reputation as a staff officer of exceptional competence. His future career would be shaped by the lessons learned in Mexico, though his natural caution would sometimes conflict with the aggressive tactics that had proven so successful at Cerro Gordo. The Mexican forces, retreating toward the interior of their country, left behind more than just equipment and supplies. They had abandoned the strategic initiative, allowing American forces to dictate the terms of future engagements. Santa Anna's army, though still formidable, would never again enjoy the kind of defensive advantages that had made Cerro Gordo seem impregnable. The engineering accomplishments that had made the victory possible were as impressive as the tactical success itself. Lee's ability to identify and improve the mountain path had demonstrated the crucial role that technical expertise could play in military operations. The lessons learned would influence American military doctrine for generations, establishing the importance of reconnaissance and engineering in complex operations. As American forces prepared to continue their advance toward Mexico City, the broader implications of their success became apparent. The victory at Cerro Gordo had not only cleared the immediate obstacle to their advance, but had also established American military competence on the international stage. European observers, initially skeptical of American military capabilities, began to reassess their opinions in light of Scott's tactical brilliance. The captured Mexican officers, treated with the courtesy that characterized American conduct throughout the war, provided valuable insights into enemy thinking and strategy. Their accounts revealed the shock and surprise that had characterized the Mexican response to the flanking movement, confirming the complete tactical surprise that Lee's reconnaissance had achieved. These interviews would later contribute to the historical understanding of the battle. The human cost of the victory, while relatively light for the Americans, was nonetheless significant. Medical personnel continued their work among the wounded, their efforts demonstrating the humanitarian values that persisted even in the midst of warfare. The casualties of both armies received equal treatment, reflecting the professional standards that characterized American military conduct. The strategic success at Cerro Gordo had implications that extended far beyond the immediate military situation. The victory had demonstrated American ability to conduct complex operations in difficult terrain, far from their base of supply. This capability would prove crucial in the nation's future expansion and development, establishing precedents that would influence American military thinking for decades to come. As the sun set over the battlefield on April 19th, the mountain pass that had witnessed such dramatic events began to return to its natural quiet. But the echoes of the battle would resonate through American military history, inspiring future generations of officers and establishing the reputation of the men who had made that fierce climb. The victory at Cerro Gordo had indeed defined a generation of soldiers, providing them with the experience and confidence that would serve them well in the greater conflicts that lay ahead. The weeks following the victory at Cerro Gordo witnessed a fundamental transformation in the character of the Mexican-American War. What had begun as a border conflict had evolved into a campaign that would reshape the North American continent and establish the United States as a major military power. The officers who had participated in Scott's brilliant flanking movement carried with them lessons that would influence American military doctrine for generations to come. Captain Lee, now recognized as one of the Army's most promising young officers, found himself at the center of strategic planning for the advance on Mexico City. His success at Cerro Gordo had demonstrated the crucial importance of reconnaissance and engineering in military operations, establishing principles that would guide American military thinking. Well into the future, the mountain pass that had seemed impossible to traverse had become a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. The tactical innovations employed at Cerro Gordo would be studied in military academies throughout the world. The combination of detailed reconnaissance, careful preparation, and audacious execution had created a template for successful military operations that transcended the specific circumstances of the Mexican War. European military observers, initially skeptical of American capabilities, began to reassess their opinions in light of Scott's achievements. Lieutenant Grant, his experience in Mexico providing the foundation for his future military career, reflected on the lessons learned during the campaign. The importance of logistics, the value of surprise, and the power of coordinated operations had all been demonstrated with devastating clarity at Cerro Gordo. These insights would prove invaluable when he later commanded armies in the Civil War, facing many of the same officers who had served alongside him in Mexico. The psychological impact of the victory extended far beyond the immediate military situation. The battle had demonstrated that American forces could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles through superior planning and execution. This confidence would prove crucial in the challenges that lay ahead, both in the completion of the Mexican campaign and in the greater conflicts that would soon divide the nation. General Scott's reputation as a military commander was now secure, his tactical brilliance having been proven on the international stage. The victory at Cerro Gordo had established him as one of the foremost military minds of his generation, capable of conducting complex operations under the most challenging circumstances. His innovative approach to warfare would influence American military doctrine for decades to come. The Mexican forces, though defeated, had not been destroyed. Santa Anna's ability to preserve the core of his army despite the disaster at Cerro Gordo demonstrated the resilience that would characterize Mexican resistance throughout the war. The conflict would continue for months, but the strategic initiative had clearly passed to the Americans, who now possessed the confidence and experience needed to complete their campaign. The engineering accomplishments that had made the victory possible established new standards for military operations in difficult terrain. Lee's ability to identify and improve the mountain path had demonstrated the crucial role that technical expertise could play in achieving tactical success. These lessons would prove invaluable as American forces continued their advance toward Mexico City and beyond. As the months passed and the war drew to its conclusion, the significance of the victory at Cerro Gordo became increasingly apparent. The battle had not only cleared the path to Mexico City, but had also established the reputation of officers who would later command armies in the Civil War. The experience gained in Mexico would prove crucial in the greater conflict that would soon test the nation's resolve. The mountain pass that had witnessed such dramatic events gradually returned to its natural quiet, but the lessons learned there would echo through American military history. The steep climb that had seemed impossible had become a pathway to victory, demonstrating that American forces could overcome any obstacle through superior planning, innovative tactics, and sheer determination. The generation of soldiers who had made that fierce climb at Cerro Gordo had indeed been defined by the experience. They had learned lessons about leadership, courage, and tactical innovation that would serve them well in the challenges ahead. The victory had established their reputation as military leaders of exceptional competence, capable of conducting operations that would reshape the North American continent. The Battle of Cerro Gordo stands as a testament to the power of military innovation and the importance of superior planning in achieving tactical success. The officers who participated in that victory would carry its lessons into future conflicts, where their experience in Mexico would prove invaluable. The mountain pass that had seemed so formidable would be remembered as the place where a generation of American military leaders proved their competence on the international stage, establishing the foundation for the nation's emergence as a world power. The echoes of that battle continue to resonate in American military doctrine, reminding future generations that no obstacle is insurmountable when faced with proper planning, innovative thinking, and the courage to attempt the seemingly impossible. The fierce climb at Cerro Gordo had indeed defined a generation of soldiers, providing them with the experience and confidence that would serve the nation well in the greater challenges that lay ahead.